Welcome everyone to Crowdsourcing Ideas at Scale, where I'm very excited to be joined by John Rains and Nick Blasio, who will introduce themselves shortly, but have a lot of experience in the space of using ideas to drive results in organizations. They are and have been your peers in the types of roles that they've held and now hold. So they've been involved in kind of making ideas into real world solutions, as John talks about at Mott MacDonald, and into kind of new product services, ways of working at Nestle, and now at Capgemini Invent for Nick. So today we're going to be talking about how we can, as organizations, leverage the power of employee ideas, which all sounds really good in theory, but when you get into the practice, there's a load of difficult things that you need to get right. And that's where we brought in today's experts to help us with some of the things that we can do to make our ideas programs much, much more effective if we choose to run them. So how we're going to run this, it's a short, snappy panel. So we've only got about 30 minutes to try and give you all as much value as possible. And that's the important bit. So for the first 10 minutes or so, we're going to have a discussion. I'm going to let John and Nick introduce themselves. They have maybe a couple of things to share as kind of opening points about what they'd like to talk about. Then I'm going to guide a discussion for the second third of the 30 minutes that we've got, where I've got a bunch of questions. I love this stuff. I'm geek out about this stuff all day long. And so for my own learning, I've got some questions on the subjects that each of them are experts about. And then for that last 10 minutes is going to be your chance to step up and ask questions. And hopefully that will work really nicely and we'll all go away with lots of learnings to take into our own organizations. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Will Reed. I'm the founder and CEO at Sideways 6. So we're the employee ideas company that helps to bring good ideas to life every day, everywhere, and from everyone. We do that through our integrated employee ideas platform and also through a bunch of ideas experts who work at Sideways 6 with some of the world's best companies to help them run really effective employee ideas programs. And I'm now going to pass on to John Rains and then to Nick Blasio to introduce themselves and their areas of expertise. John.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Really good, and delighted to be here and excited, and hopefully Nick and I will probably learn a few things ourselves, I guess, as well, but I'm very happy to share. So an introduction to me. So I am the innovation manager for Mott MacDonald. Mott MacDonald is a global engineering consultant and managing firm around the world, about 17,000 people, $2 billion turnover type approach. And yeah, I've been working on the innovation space for probably about 5 years now. Background in civil engineering and delivering infrastructure projects, mostly in the UK, across Europe and a few in other parts of the world. I've just completed setting up and running Mott MacDonald Ventures, which is an equity investment CVC, where we made a few investments in various parts of the world, strategic ones to help us deliver better solutions for our clients in the infrastructure space. And I have the great pleasure of sitting on the BSI IMS1 for Innovation Management Committee, which has now led me, and I've had the pleasure of being invited onto the ISO committee, where we're writing the innovation management standard to help all innovation managers, and hopefully talk about that a little bit more. Maybe a couple of topics I'd certainly like to share, and very interested in the questions were from Will and others around the ability to articulate challenge statements really well for all stakeholders. That's a key area I think is really important, and understand the problem first well before you go and look for the ideas to solve a little bit. And the other thing is really using the business model canvas approach professionally to bring in the market, the commercial, the technical aspects, or the hipsters, hackers, and hecklers involved, similar to the different personas around that. So yeah, looking forward to the chat. Hopefully something I can add, and pass over to Nick.
Thanks, John. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, so everyone. So Nick Blasio. So I'm a director of consumer products retail manufacturing in Invent, Switzerland. Invent, so parts of Capgemini Group. I joined in September, having previously done 8 years at specifically in the field of innovation, corporate innovation at Nestle, where I co-founded an employee innovation accelerator, and we'll touch on that a bit later. And I had the good luck to then work with Will and his team as part of that journey. And now in my role, it's really today more about digital innovation, how I can help companies right from strategy way to execution, bring their own new business models, improved ways of working fundamentally to life, right? And it's quite broad. Capgemini, if you are familiar with it, it's a French group, started in the IT world. It's in the DNA for 60 years, 22 billion euros big last year, with 370,000 employees. So it's really big. It's got a huge amount of capabilities end to end, particularly when it comes to technology-driven innovation as well, which really excites me, and I've done quite a bit of that in my past roles. And really today I'm here to help listen to, as John said, I'm sure we're both going to learn quite a lot as well. We're always doing these things, right? And to honestly listen and participate with people who are really interested in a topic. There's nothing more exciting than to be part of a group, a tribe, right, of innovators, people who really want to make a difference in their particular field and are looking at new ways to make that happen, which ultimately is what innovation is, right? So look, I'm really keen and excited to be here today, and I will be focusing on how to foster a culture of innovation. And I've got a couple of examples, and more importantly, it's really in the dialogue, bringing the experience to life. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, John. So we're going to go into how we get this right, and also some of the things that can make us get these things wrong. But let's start with what is the prize, right? If we are crowdsourcing ideas at scale, if we are building that culture of innovation, Nick, John, if we are able to kind of articulate challenge statements in the right way, to put the right rigor behind the ideas themselves, to bring in the right people at the right times, you've both seen idea-led innovation programs work and deliver good results. What can this look like if you get it right? Just for some of the people on the call that might be earlier on in their journey and thinking, well, is it all worth it in the first place?
Sure, Nick, do you want to go?
Sure. So what kind of things people can expect if they get it right? So one, either grey hair or lack of hair. Maybe Frank, John. So we're here for that reason. But you can see we're smiling, right? And why? Because you see, regardless of the role that you play in bringing innovation to life, employee-driven innovation specifically, it is hugely rewarding. So on a purely personal note, it's been great endeavors. The kind of examples of projects which I've worked on where the blood, sweat, and tears have led to something is multi-million revenue in-market solutions. In my case, I say new products. I helped Nestle to bring to market that I know otherwise would never have existed, right? Should my program not have been there, that the right challenge was framed to have inspired one of our employees and then rally the momentum behind it for people to jump on and say, actually, I think you're onto something here, right? So we don't have that today. And yeah, you got people who then challenge, well, there's a good reason why we don't have such a product in the portfolio doing providing that kind of value. And it's a fact that someone has come across and you've enabled the framework to allow that kind of new idea to come to life, but you've actually helped it and proven it to people along the way. So the whole proving it along the process chain to get is the key thing, and it is persistence is key to make happen. But again, with all the aspects of it, it's brilliant.
That's one of the really exciting things for me, is when the things in the physical world are different because of these ideas that have come often from people across the pockets of our organization. John, how about yourself? What do you see as the kind of benefits to getting these types of things right?
Yeah, I think it's very similar, Nick, I think on that. I think the probably the kind of three areas of the inspiration through challenge to my colleagues, just seeing someone actually get inspired, knowing that they have this opportunity to make a personal difference and build the team probably, and seeing it accelerate careers. Then externally to sort of the company of what it can do for us to develop our business, then through to our clients and making a real impact in the world, and then through to their clients, as in us, full loop back to customers in the whole world. So I think you can see that inspiration through challenge, but you do need that resilience to get there. So I guess, best example for us would be our Moata platform solution, digital innovation. And we've spent the last 10 years, and I've been involved for at least 7 years of that, taking that from moving engineering from spreadsheets through to platform-based drag and drop composable solutions right through to delivery that for clients. So for example, for Anglian Water, they're putting a very 200-mile long pipeline called a strategic pipeline alliance through East Anglia, and our digital solution to automate the pipeline design, which now exists, that has helped the pipe go in the right place, low carbon solution, avoiding the environmental sensitive areas. And that's right from a conversation I had in Cambridge about 5 years ago, where my colleague Lewis comes up and says, I think we should automate this. We've got loads of partners, we should do this. And that is tremendously motivational, both to the whole team doing it, but also for me personally, seeing that from literally the idea right through a lot of hard work to impacting in the real world, which is cleaner water delivered into the UK, for that example.
I love that. So,
well, if I may just quickly build on that as well, I think that John's touched on at the very end that it's also for me super key. It's not just about the impact in the real world. It's we talk a lot about sustainability, right? And people may feel, look, I'm here, I'm an accountant in this big multinational, right? Or I work in IT, and maybe feel disconnected, one, from the end product, right, that the company delivers to consumers, and then also in terms of the sustainability driven goals of the company as well, and feeling look, there's so much, because I work in this big company and there's so much we can be doing, and I've got all these great ideas and put in place that I think are going to make a difference, and being able to provide a channel for that. And not just as an example, in my case as well, there was whether we're using satellite imagery with some artificial intelligence on top, allowed us to, when I was at Nestle and one of my projects, to actually be able to identify encroaching deforestation onto coffee farms, right? So that can give you massive ability at scale to then focus your limited resources, because they're always limited in these cases, to actually send people on the ground and work with farmers in that case, and say, look, we've got this portfolio of stuff you can be doing and that we already are pushing, but we realize that you're probably more at risk than your farmer neighbor down there. Let's can we help you to already install some of these great regenerative practices that we've been working on, and help and coach it. But being able to provide that focus and that target, and then something really transformative, even something when it comes to culture can take time. So a great example there as well.
I love it. What you've both spoken about there for me is examples of what happens when there is focus and when there is alignment, and when you're actually able to bring through these ideas that lead to innovation projects that, John, you said it really nicely, which is like good for the customer, good for the company, good for the person, right? But I'm sure I often will speak to people who are earlier on in their ideas journey, and they might have a concept in their head of ideas programs which are not aligned and which are not focused, and we know what that leads to, right? These are the ideas that are just never going to go anywhere. John, the work that you've been doing with the ISO 56000 is all about alignment, right? The alignment of innovation activity. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit around how you solve that alignment problem generally, if you're doing an employee ideas program or the ideas piece, but really to touch on how potentially the ISO can help, and why it's something for people to seriously consider.
Yeah, thanks. Close to my heart, as you know. And I have to first of all say that although it's I do have a very small part to play, there's a lot of very more cleverer, if that's the word, people who've been working this for about 20 years all around the world. So just to set the context, I suppose the first thing that a lot of people go with innovation and standards is, can you standardize innovation? And the answer is no, you definitely can't, because they're all different. But can you standardize the management of innovation? Absolutely. And there are certain aspects of that people like maybe the business model canvas that you say, hey, that's a pretty good tool. So there's a good momentum of things that are built around this. And so we've been working through British Standards Institute, in my case, onto the ISO, which is International Standard Organization, and taken effectively the same as the quality management standard 9001 and do an innovation thing with it, which has taken many years to put together a suite of documents. The practical manifestation of that is a series of about 6 documents of guidance of how do you innovate, a central model of the baseline 5 stages of innovation, which is an encouragement to use similar terminology and methodology. It also has 8 principles which follow, which I'll just run through really quickly, which is number 1, starting through to number 8, is the realization of value, future-focused leadership, setting the strategic direction and alignment, to your point there, the appropriate culture in the context of the company, which is combining the sort of coexistence of creativity at the front end with the effective and commercial execution and delivery at the bang end, and everything in between. So innovation isn't creativity, it's exploring and executing, and the whole thing between. That cultural piece that Nick said is really important. The other one is exploring insights, and actually what are the practical insights you get out of that area. Next one's managing uncertainty. So it's not risk management, it's about uncertainty management. So this is before risk management. How do you even move the assumptions you've made for these ideas into knowledge and in that transfer? Next one's adaptability, which is adapting the process to the innovation, not the other way around. So feel strongly that you do not have a fixed process that you step through. You need to adapt that. And then the last one is a systemic and systematic approach. So the ISO and the documents around there are working towards a requirement standard for companies and organizations to be accredited towards. That standard will come out in hopefully next year. It might be a little bit late, but there's already in the suite of standards a whole range of existing useful documents. How do you ideate? What are the KPIs for innovation? How do you partner? How do you manage intellectual property, that are published and available? And my general idea, just sort of wrap up around that, is that if we have a common framework and a common language of terminology, what is an incubator, what's an accelerator, it probably helps a better conversation. And as long as it doesn't constrain the creativity and that inspirational stuff that we talked around before, which I don't think it does. So it just enables that baseline and sort of foundational pieces to have better conversations. And I'm working with a lot of customers who are very interested in it. And yeah, happy to talk more to anyone on the call another time.
John, if you could pull out maybe 1 or 2 non-obvious things that help people in achieving the results that you expect the standard to be able to help them to achieve. So obviously, I'm assuming everyone's going to brush off and investigate this and eagerly await it for release next year. But if there's just a couple of kind of tips or actions that people could take when they're putting together their employee ideas programs to get on their way to achieving the things that the standard would help them to achieve, what might they be?
Sure. I think the first thing I would say is making sure that you've got the senior leadership buy-in and a very clear either verbal or preferably written policy of what are you actually trying to do, from the level of commitment and the areas of innovation. And then I follow closely with that with sort of number 2 would be to write an innovation strategy. And that gives everything that you need to do about what level, which horizon, how much effort you want to put in there, and then things flow from that. So that's the place before you pile in and say, give us all your ideas. Have a think about it first. Get a plan.
100%. So have a strategy, know where you're aiming, and then get that leadership buy-in, which leads me on to yourself, Nick. So I think something that you've been able to cultivate when you're one of the co-founders of Ingenious is you're able to build a platform that employees wanted to engage in, right? So it's all very well having the best laid plans, but if you can't get anyone to come and engage, you've got a challenge. So could you talk a little bit around how you were able to get people to engage, and then more generally now when you're working with customers, what you see as effective strategies to build engagement in your innovation program?
Yeah, absolutely. So I now have the pleasure of taking the experience and the passion of what I was doing there in my previous role to now also helping, and exactly as John said, with clients in thinking what is that strategy of innovation, because the excitement behind intrapreneurship and employee-driven innovation, incubators, accelerators, and drives to many people saying we just have to do one right now. Typically, that's the CEO that says go find someone and takes a run with it. But then the actual execution it can go awry quite quickly. So at least now I have the pleasure of bringing advice to fold, and also I'm tapping a lot into, and I'll share in a moment as well, with our management lab, which actually does a lot on the research side. And John, you mentioned before we start the call, you work at Brunel University as an example to work on the ISO, and a lot of people there as well. And I have the pleasure of working through our management lab on with professors at the Harvard Business School, and exactly on this topic of chief innovation officers and what you need to foster culture, innovation, etc. Right? So that's cool. I wanted to mention at the beginning, because I really agree with, without a strategy, without a solid process, we're actually deciding what kind of program do you want to run. It's going to be a mess. People won't get it, and if people don't get it, then your messages from the top, are going to get lost in translation, right? Everyone's going to understand a bit differently of what the role of your innovation program is. People are going to think it's going to step into their territory, right? And so engagement then from the people that you hope to proactively be part of this, a part of the process, not just the employees, but all the other stakeholders, right? That are in some cases really explicitly involved, and some much more intrinsically, right? So you always got the guys behind you, great networkers, and maybe they're not the ones who have the ideas themselves or want to put themselves forward, but they're happy to mobilize the people around to make it happen, as an example. But in terms of then how to engage people in the kind of strategies, one and linked to that is, first and foremost, be very clear on what the program is meant to be there for, right? So, and of course, you always want the CEO to be the one. Maybe that's not always achievable in day one. Sometimes you start a little bit lower down the range, build great proof points, and use that to go up the ladder, right? And so on. And then maybe position hyper the CEO. Of course, if you can get the CEO from the very beginning, that's always the dream. And if you can, it sends a very powerful message. But it comes with a warning as well, because CEO there saying, look, we absolutely want you to be part of this as a way of getting people mobilized, engaged, and send the right vibes out, right? Is unless it's followed through with the corresponding level of support, and which includes investment, then it's going to ultimately die. So it's a question of when, right? What's worse, depending on how it could collapse, is going to really affect confidence and the trust for reboots afterwards, to when the experience takes hold and you say, okay, well, we went wrong, we've got to start again. So I think ultimately it comes down to trust. And I say, if you can get the trust right from the more senior person of your company, again, ideally the CEO, that sends a very strong message to say, look, we want you to be part of the company's future, right? Again, regardless of what the role you play. Now, how the role you can play in that is like this, and whether it's an incubator that has such a framework, or an accelerator, which is a different one, right? Or simply, or it's maybe part of HR, which also is where normally some of these kind of issues start, but have different sets of challenges. Ultimately, it comes down to the behavior and the values of, first, the values of the company, the principles and the norms, and what the CEO is trying to push. And if you can translate that into, look, these are behaviors that we need to help bring this to life. And this is how I'm going to give you an innovator, an incubator, an accelerator, and this is how it's going to work as a means for you to do that and be part of this story. That's
you just touched on something really important for me there, Nick, because we talk a lot with people that are just going on their ideas journeys. We say, look, you need to go and get that endorsement from a fairly high level. Just like you've said, it can't just be kind of fair weather post a message, they need to be there with the resource as well. So the next question is naturally, well, how do I get that? And I think you touched on something really important there, which is that it has to have a benefit to that person. But you've touched on like 3 benefits there, right? You make people feel heard, you make people feel like there are people, don't make them, they genuinely feel like they're a part of the company's future because they are. The second thing is that you are looking at what the organization cares about, and you're able to drive people to actually share in that. So, and then the third thing is the obvious thing, which is the benefit from the ideas themselves. I've got one more question, which I'd like to ask, but would love to see some more questions come up in the chat. There's been some brilliant ones already, and we'll go through those, but just a little bit more of a chance for people to add them in, and we can open this up for discussion. You can also raise your hand at this point, and we will go through raised hands if you'd like to ask a question the old-fashioned way. We can definitely do that too. So my final kind of question here is, what do people get wrong outside of what we've already talked about, that we can help people do a little pre-mortem if they're planning their ideas program now, and so that they can kind of mitigate for that risk. So one of the things we've already talked about, lack of leadership engagement. Another thing we've already talked about, a lack of focus and alignment. And another one is a lack of a strategy. So I'm going to take them away from you and make this more difficult. And I'll give you the countdown clock now. But I'd love to hear one thing that you can look at and that could be a killer to your innovation program. And then if you have any tips on how you can mitigate that, that would be super helpful as well. And whoever wants to jump on to that first, I appreciate I've given you a difficult task here, gentlemen.
That's okay. Nick, shall I go first this time?
Please.
Chuck you under on the first one. You did. I think one thing for me, Will, is making sure really clear who are the owners of the decisions. So getting the decisions right. When you come to these, they have an idea. How do you give feedback in the right kind of way? Who owns the budget? How's it aligned to that business unit aspect? So getting the deciders. My experience is that when we've got the deciders in the room, there's a little bit of procrastination of saying, have you spoken to this? And that, could you give me a bit more information? And getting them trained and coached to be as comfortable as they can be with the uncertainty and the risk, and just take that chance, because there isn't any more information, because it's a new idea, is probably the biggest thing I've come across recently.
I love that, John. That's gold. Thank you. Nick.
Yeah, you got a good one there. so without engagement, alignment, strategy, or John just said, I'd say the really the vision of what you want to achieve, right? So what is it that you're looking for, and you know, where do you want to go? There's 2 sides, I'd say. One is, what's it the output, what's the outcome, right, that you want for the company, and if you can very simply convey that, right? So whether it's new products, new services, new business models, right, new improved processes, which all of which can play a role. And I think that's, if you can be clear on that aspect first, and then the way it's you convey that with the right set of confidence, then with the clarity.
How specific are you being there, Nick? Are you giving numbers to this? Like, are you saying by the end of year 1 we're going to have X, Y, and Z, or are we, are you only sharing that with people who can help fund and spread the word, or are you sharing that with everybody?
No, I think you have to.
How transparent?
I mean, you have to share. Yeah, you have to share it with the people that you want to touch, right? Because ultimately, there's a fact again, focusing on where do you want said program to take the company, right? On the people side, as well as on the pure business metrics, right? So we talk a lot about what Simon Sinek and co inspire us about, being an infinite game, and as an example, then how do you bring that form of inspiration to your people, again through this container of an accelerator program. And I think if you as the leader here, again, if the CEO ideally can bring that message to life, say, look, we've got lots of people doing lots of things in this company, right? And we have an R&D department that has got to do its thing. We've got a product team that does its thing, and so on. And this is not necessarily what I want you to do, something separate to that. We may have to run it a bit separately for good reason, but it's about being a boost and enabler to an enhancer to what we already have as a company, and kind of focusing message on there, because I think that for me, what I think is a big challenge is people think, oh, it's an innovation accelerator, it's a program that we're launching, and by consequence, people start thinking, well, okay, now we're gonna, I'm gonna start sending. How can I build on the next spaceship that's gonna take my products? Like, no, that's got nothing to do with what we provide, right?
We had a funny one once. I spoke to someone and they said that the day we launched our ideas program, we weren't working with them. They had ideas come in as varied as, can we have an ice cream maker in the corner of the office? And here's a new business line that we should completely turn our attention to. And here's why we should have a 4-day working week, and. So I think that is really important. Let's go to questions from the crowd. There's a really nice one here that I think is a nitty-gritty question, which is always my favorites. So when crowdsourcing ideas at scale, how are you able to acknowledge and vet every idea that comes through? And furthermore, for those employees that have ideas that aren't feasible or they're not aligned, so we talked about the importance of alignment, what steps can you take to respond and provide feedback and encouragement? So this is a classic, right? And you'll have both felt this when you've been running these programs. You get these ideas coming through that you can't push forwards with for whatever reason. It might be that they're poor quality, it might be that they're just not aligned, might be some politics, let's be honest. What can you do to provide feedback and encouragement and treat that in a good way? And then the second thing is, how can you acknowledge and manage lots of ideas coming in at scale? Whoever would like to say that. I can provide some thoughts on it.
I can go if you like.
Yeah, please, John. Go
well, I suppose the answer that you'd like is you need an ideas management system to be able to do it at scale, obviously. But I think you do. And my colleagues, even now, we're very grateful for using the system. But even now, we've got people with spreadsheets and Planner and Microsoft Teams and that kind of stuff. And you soon find out that it isn't configured and set up to be able to run at speed and be respectful of colleagues to answer straight away. You go off and do that. So definitely that. But I'm building on that, I would say, if you're clear, similar to what Nick was saying, if you're clear on the spaces that you'd like to innovate, this is what we would like ideas on, and you communicate that quite clearly, then that helps people respond with the ideas and enables a better decision. And less are the ideas saying, well, that's not something we'd be interested in. Well, you did tell us what you're interested in, so definitely communicate that. I just think the basics of being respectful and around the system of replying quickly, even if that's not a type of thing we're looking for. And again, just publishing the criteria upon which you're making the decision. Are you looking for things for internal efficiency, or are you looking for a new business line? What are you doing? And that's where that strategy piece comes in, and communicating that. So, but the biggest thing I think is respond very quickly within days, with at least an acknowledgement to say, hey, we've listened, we've heard you, even if you're not able to make a decision around that. That's kind of my view.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And once you've communicated that beforehand, when you reject an idea or you say not for now, you're able to point back to it. So it doesn't feel personal. You're saying, look, we were transparent about what we were looking for, and having judged this, we just don't feel that it fits in with that alignment. Nick, how about yourself? Any top tips here?
Yeah, no, just building on both of your comments to that. So one, certainly technology has a role to play, and equally the likes of your offering will and others in this space gives ability to interact with the entire employee workforce, right? And there's the two sides again. There's one about what is the positioning of the program that's supporting this employee innovations, and what's the goal of the program, right? How much is about the innovations itself that come out of it? How much is about the ideas that, and so the entrepreneurs, right? So you got the ideas and entrepreneurs. And this is always something which I always used to say and continue to do so is, look, the best bit is when you've delivered a great innovation and you developed the people around it, not just the entrepreneur, but everyone else around it, right? But either way, if you have to prioritize one or the other for your program, what is that? And then convey that, right? So I think that's already one thing, because then that also drives your thinking as the people responsible as well for the program, those you want to participate in assessing the ideas. but also the ones, you know, in the crowdsourcing piece that like and comment and so, and what's the role that they have to play as well, right? Again, so you've got to be clear to them at the moment. And if you can do that, then it makes the whole process more simple, because if your idea doesn't get selected, and 99.99% of ideas do not get selected, people don't feel, if they've understood what the program is for and they've understood that why the idea was not selected in the context of that program and that challenge, it's okay. Actually, it's okay. It inspires them to come back for more, and that's what you want, right? You want absolutely to keep them coming back. So look, I think that's the thing. Yes, just to say, be respectful, being ideas personalized as possible to people responding. Why not? Out of, and just give you a metric which I looked at before I left Nestle as an example. When I left, about 10,000 ideas have been submitted over those 8 years. I had personally touched, and you know, even if it's a couple of words, please tell me more, right? The idea, the better part of 3,000, 4,000 of those in that time. So the people running programs have also got to believe in it to the point that they have to be hands-on, interactive, and they've got to bring people in and they've got to respond to keep that wheel going. As soon as they step off, or if they don't feel that's their duty and they're trusting it to somebody else, well, then also don't be surprised necessarily if it does not go as planned.
So yeah. Thank you. And there's a follow-up question from Ben, who I think asked the first question. So so we've talked a little bit around these ideas that don't quite align. What about if you get an idea that is fantastic, but the impact is only in one area of the organization? Do you just kind of deprioritize it because the impact isn't broad, or do you send it off to the right person? How would you deal with an idea like that at Mott MacDonald, John?
Yeah, I guess this comes back to how you'd set up the operating model for your innovation management system. So do you go for one central source for 370,000 people for Capgemini as one challenge? Give us all your ideas. Probably not. Or do you actually separate that into distinct areas, for example, by that part of the business, which I would suggest that you do. So when you're setting up the strategy, it's like which parts of the business wants to buy into the innovation system by business unit or a technical area, and break it down into those modules, if you like. And then you've got more chance of the people, when it is only affecting one part of the business, then that's the part of the business that wants to get stuck in. So be the leader of that part. But yeah, I mean, more broadly, from my experience, as long as the business case stacks up, there's more value coming out of it from the stakeholders than there is perceived cost going in. Fine, it doesn't have to be global. It just needs to be valuable to the stakeholders. And indeed, you really need a whole portfolio of these ideas. It's really difficult to know what the value will be. So you need sort of horizon 1, 2, 3, some big ticket items and small improvements and things in the middle as well. So yeah, you should.
One of the things that we do to that point, John, is pace is important, right? And yeah. We do operate in businesses often where no matter how much we talk about long-term thinking and no matter how much the innovation team might be given a long-term remit, being able to prove those smaller things coming through month by month, quarter by quarter, can provide a nice bit of pace while you're also working on the longer horizon ideas. Cool. There's one very specific question for you here, John, which is on there's a member of the audience who says we've got ISO 14001 and we've got ISO 9001. What are we going to gain with ISO 56000?
Okay, good question. I would say it's the idea is not to have a tick box exercise as another management thing and slow you down. It is a great set of documents, and it would, if you implement it, is likely to enable you to make better decisions, go faster with the innovations, progress the ones to focus your limited resources in the area. If you want to collaborate with other companies around Europe, from the Czech Republic, which you probably do, if you are using that and working with other companies, you're going to be using the same language. So you're going to be working with other parts in Czech Republic and with other countries in Europe and beyond to be able to make a difference right through probably to the SDGs, if you like, or whatever level you want.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have a couple of minutes left. If there's any more questions, please get them in. If not, then Nick, I'm going to ask you to share. You mentioned you'd kind of brought a couple of stories with you. I was wondering if you might be able to take a couple of minutes to take us through a story that potentially we could learn from in this space, and what, again, how we're getting these kind of innovation programs right, and what happens when we do. Would that work? I'm putting you on the spot here, so no worries if not.
Yeah, let's see if what I've got here may be in line, maybe slightly bit of a tweak in the messaging to what you're looking for. I think this here for me, it's about focusing on different archetypes we spoke about earlier, right? But I think what is it you want to be, right? And there's no wrong answer as well. So just when anyone talks about an intrapreneurship program or employee innovation program, instantly you have a particular vision of what that is. And here's just to show you, and I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see there's at least how we structured it, 3 different archetypes of such a program. And where did you want to go at the very beginning and at the bottom there? Like say, do you want to go? It's bottom up. It's very lean. It's you can talk about giving a little bit of time for an employee to contribute some time. It's very unstructured. Just give me your ideas, and we'll give you some training, and we'll help you develop your innovation skills. But there's no commitment from the company to actually deliver the innovation, right? On that side of the spectrum. But it's still useful. It's still very solid ambition to help upskill the people and all the good stuff that comes with that in today. And you see examples of 3M and Intuit Labs that do that. I mean, Intuit Labs do like the green belts, black belts of being an innovator, right? So there's certifications involved, and that's good. Not as an ISO, let's say, where it's transferable between companies, but it's definitely a good foundation. And then just say, like you can see, we're familiar with more the structured versions of a program. And again, it's also flavors are different. The way that BASF versus Google also run some very key differences in how they run their intrapreneurship program. Google, you can leave your job, dedicate 100% to it, should be given the green light. You cannot do that at BASF. But the fact that such a solid structure coming around is super useful, and it brings another stage of seriousness of what you're trying to achieve, and scalability. And then finally, the kind which I was fortunate to help bring to life was something that's more permanent, right? So how do you and Kim Innovator there from BASF is different from Genius did it, and it's different from the others that you see, and that's okay, right? Again, there's many different types of companies out there. There's many different ways of bringing to life employee-driven innovation. Now, for me, that's the key message I wanted to kind of convey. And here you see kind of some of the key differences, but also there's a flavor within each one that's relative, right? So for maybe for Nestle or versus Kim Innovator versus someone else, in terms of the thresholds of investment per project, as an example, could be radically different, right? And that's to consider as well. So,
perfect.
What do you want to be, and what do you want to do? Yeah.
Thank you. Some of the things that have jumped out to me here, all about alignment. How can we kind of create a compelling vision that we can get leadership buy-in into, and how can we do that without kind of trying to get them to take on something new? How can we just feed into the things that the organization already cares about, and the organization and the leader is already actively trying to make happen? How can we make sure that we have a strategy before we launch? So actually knowing what we're going to do with these different ideas, what type of ideas are we looking for, what type of innovations are we looking for, how are we going to fund these things, where are they going to go, is really interesting. John, your point on quick decisions from decision makers and kind of getting them comfortable with uncertainty, I think is a really interesting one. Some good examples of how we can deal with ideas that come in that maybe aren't going to be brought to life, and how we can do that sensitively. And then finally, Nick, kind of the different levels of kind of resourcing and permanence there are super interesting. So hopefully you can all join me in saying a big thank you to our panelists, to Nick and to John. If we can help at all, if you want to hear more about this, if you want to ask us questions, I know that John and Nick are both very interested in these subjects, and would be very happy to pick up anything after this call. And yeah, just a thank you to everyone who's joined. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
John, I did learn a lot, so it's good.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, John.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.